Hello everyone and welcome to 7 by 7, the Tribal Habits video blog, and in fact the final Tribal Habits video blog for 2020. This 7 by 7 is going to be a little bit different. Normally we use these videos to pick apart an L&D topic and give you tangible advice and insights that are going to help you in your role. But today we're doing a year in review, and end of year reviews are normally something that are conducted in private, but luckily it's not my end of year review. We're looking at 2020's end of year review. So to get started, let me introduce David King, the CEO and founder of Tribal Habits. How are you, Dave?
Jordan, I'm excellent. I'm pleased to see we've coordinated our red and green Christmas outfits as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Dave, 2020 has been an absolute doozy of a year. We've had pandemics, fires, elections. It's been a year for the books for sure. In this video, we're going to stay away from politics, we're going to stay away from epidemiology, and we're going to stay away from climate change. But 2020 certainly left its mark on the L&D industry, didn't it?
Yeah, look, it has. It's been a very unusual year. And I think we felt it here at Tribal Habits. You could feel the rhythms through the year in our customers and in platform activity, and just in the huge move of people working from home, and how organizations grappled with that from a knowledge and training point of view.
So that's the first thing I'd like to dive into today. There's a couple of things here. One is that had very little impact on us at Tribal Habits because we were working from home before the pandemic happened. Yes. But it has been this sort of fundamental shift from a bit of a fringe activity that some smaller companies or some tech companies were doing to an everyday reality for almost every business across the country. So how do you see that this shift of working from home or remote working has impacted the L&D space?
Yeah, it's a good point. And I mean, as a remote working organization from scratch, we're all located everywhere. It was really interesting to watch from the sidelines other organizations grapple with it. Yeah. So on training and L&D, I saw it quite bifurcated, to be honest. I felt larger organizations back in March were really paralyzed. And I remember you and I spoke about that. We had a bunch of organizations ready to kind of get going with training changes who just stopped making decisions. Yeah. And uncertainty, I guess, bred their inability to act. But then we had a lot of smaller organizations that, moved really rapidly into Zoom and into Teams and into online learning. And I guess that's typical. Smaller organizations react faster, but they also embrace change a bit quicker. And it was funny, at the start of the year, no one knew what Teams was. Now everyone knows what Teams is. Yes. And same, everyone knew what Zoom was, but now everyone actually has a Zoom account. Yeah. I actually felt training organizations were the hardest hit. So those organizations that delivered training and just saw their workshops just evaporate. And that was essentially their entire business model. And if I think back on new organizations joining Tribal Habits, I reckon probably a third of those organizations this year have been training organizations that needed to just rapidly shift content online just to keep revenue going. Yeah. And I think any organization that was dependent on face-to-face learning has just had a massive wake-up call that, digitization's been happening for 20 years, and where were they in those 20 years?
Yeah. Yeah, it's certainly populating the LinkedIn memes, isn't it? It's like, what encouraged your digital transformation? Was it the CTO? Was it the CEO? Or was it COVID-19?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's perfect summary.
Yeah. So the next thing I want to talk about is induction and new people starting in new organizations. So a lot of organizations felt the pinch and were forced to get rid of staff this year. But similarly, there's been some industries that have boomed and they've had to hire people under these really challenging circumstances where we're not allowed to go to offices, we're not allowed face-to-face contact. How have you seen that play out?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. And again, we've definitely heard the stories of the people who got hired and haven't met anyone for a month. It's a little bit of, well, what you going to do? There's really no options around this. That's just how it's going to be. So from an employee's point of view, it's not like you can get annoyed with the induction process you're going through because you've got really everyone's in the same boat. Yeah. That being said, there were organizations that had already moved to a blended induction process or had an on-demand induction process. And I'm sure that they were appreciating those early changes. It's kind of that, again, if you're ready for digital transformation, if you've done it, then you were ready. I think for me, the interesting thing is culture. So it made me reflect on how do you pick up culture in an organization?
Yeah.
So many organizations feel it's a physical thing. But is that still a truth in a digital world? Tribal Habits is a great example. We only meet all face-to-face a couple of times each year, but we build culture through our use of Slack and through Zoom and through our general discussions. And so it made me question culture is maybe not as a physical thing as we thought. It also makes me think, well, how else do you pick up culture other than just interaction with your teammates? Can we teach you our culture? Can that actually just be imparted onto you rather than just picked up through osmosis?
Yeah.
And I don't know the answer to that question yet, but it certainly made me think a lot harder that if it could be taught, then maybe we and many other organizations could do a lot better job of accelerating that culture into new employees, because the sooner they get your culture, the better it is for everybody.
Yeah.
And maybe in the past, we've just they learn our culture over time, but maybe there is an opportunity to take a far more proactive approach to that.
Yeah, for me, it's been really interesting to see as people are forced to do induction online, and it might be through a series of training modules now, just that forced structure has made such a difference for a lot of organizations where, maybe an organization that wasn't as organized with its new starters before, where people would kind of arrive at work and you'd be scrambling around for computer logins and trying to find things for people to do. There's now like a standard process of induction, which is not just the make sure you give us your passport and your driver's license and your tax file number.
Yeah.
It can address some of those cultural things as well.
Well, that's what I think the key thing is. I think if culture could be taught or shared other than through physically interacting with other staff, then I think the way you do induction is really important. It is so easy to pick up a mobile phone and do a talking head, a vox pop video of someone. And if you have them scattered throughout your induction processes of real people in your organization talking about how they do things, talking about themselves, talking about that, there's a way to make the induction program more than just process, but also, that start of culture sharing or establishing what is culture. And organizations too that take the time to actually define their culture, not just turn into whatever it happened to be.
Yeah.
Have the values and live it and talk it. That's going to be really important too.
Yeah. So I think we covered this a little bit already, that COVID really has been a catalyst for a lot of organizations to move into online training. And I do really hate this term, the new normal. It's been so overused this year. It's like buzzword bingo. But fingers crossed, we are moving towards a vaccine now, and there may be some kind of change in our working environment coming at some point in 2021. So what do you think the fallout is going to be as we move into the future with this online training? Are we going back to face-to-face training? How do you think that's going to play out for most organizations?
It's a tricky one. I mean, we've seen 10 years of digital transformation in 1 year for some organizations who've responded and reacted, and they've realized the value of having a single source of truth for their training, a portal of knowledge, and also the importance of capturing knowledge, because they were faced with the what if scenario. Well, what if those experienced staff we always thought would be here are no longer here? Yeah. So when I look forward, those things are kind of lurking in the background. First of all, I pity the organizations that just took out 10-year inner city office space leases, because I think that could, in hindsight, be a difficult decision for many organizations.
Yep.
It's hard to see us going back to what it was. There's definitely a need for physical closeness in teams and in organizations. But I think we've learned now there's actually an opportunity for balance. So I don't think everyone wants to work at home. I don't think we all want to work in the office, but there is an opportunity for balance there. And for training, that means I think there's a greater need for a blended learning approach. So you can't rely on just running face-to-face meetings or on-the-job coaching anymore. I also don't think you can just rely on Zoom. I don't think that's just it's like a really minor replacement. There still is a need for that self-service, 24/7. This is how we do it. It doesn't take up human resources. It's totally scalable online delivery. But equally, not just that. We need that blended part. We still need the way to blend that all together. So I think going forward that hopefully, I think the L&D community moves to a more balanced, best of breed approach, determining how do we want to do our training, and aren't so wedded to either it's A or B, or we only do A or B, but there's a bit more flexibility for that. Of course, they need the tools to do that, but before that, they need the reason, the culture, the supportive environment. And I think they've now got that. So now it's just, we need the tools and let's get on with it.
Yeah, and I think that's really similar to the discussions we were having with a lot of our clients, even before the pandemic hit, where it's not a one or the other option. It's like, sometimes online training is going to work really well. There's certain things that you're going to need to do face-to-face training or that are optimized in a personal environment. And it's kind of about finding that blend, isn't it?
It is. For many organizations, though, it was always workshops or just online, and they didn't have the courage or knowledge to blend those two things together. And that's some of my favorite parts of Tribal Habits, when I see organizations blending that and using online training to prepare participants for a webinar, but equally prepare the facilitator for those participants by gathering data from them. And then when they get into the webinar, they just have so much of a better webinar because everyone's now got assumed knowledge. The facilitators capture data from participants before they've come in, so they can have better prepared themselves. They can engage more with participants by asking them more meaningful questions rather than just big open, what do you want to talk about? They can say, I know you want to talk about the following, and Fred, let's talk about it. And I think that then makes that webinar better because they're not wasting time teaching theory. They're doing the best of what a webinar is, which should be interactive, body language, discussion, group collaboration. So that's what I hope to see going forward.
Great. So let's move away from COVID-19 for a little while if we can. What other developments or trends do you see coming in the L&D space throughout 2021?
Well, I feel like the L&D industry hit peak learning management system about 2 years ago. And learning management systems have been this kind of backbone for the L&D industry now for about 25 years. And I don't know, I read some stat from the Association of Talent Development or something like that. There are 1,000 LMSs in the world, basically just all doing the same thing. And they haven't really evolved for a long time. And definitely there's a risk here that I'm on a propaganda pitch here for Tribal Habits, but it's not that. I think it's a trend of content becoming more important. And of course, what happens when a trend changes is that often we overreact. And so what really gave this away for me are things like LinkedIn Learning, previously Linda, or other kind of massive online course libraries. They were kind of the overreaction to having too many LMSs that had no training content and were all just about administration, to now saying, here's all the training content, like drink from the fire hose. But that's an overreaction because it's just generic, too much, not contextualized, random training. Yeah. And certainly we've spoken to a lot of people about their experiences with LinkedIn Learning, who I've mentioned twice. So I feel like I'm bashing them a bit, which I shouldn't, but it's very expensive. They go in there and it's just a jumble of stuff. You know, it's like so much to watch, but nothing on. So I'm hoping going forward, there's more of a balance there. And there are other tools out in the market that I've been inspired by myself in the last 12 months that are working around this issue of content. And how do we kind of change the nature of training from teacher and student to just kind of more collaborative involvement where anyone could be a teacher and everyone could be a student, and allowing that. The other really interesting thing I've seen this year, and I could see it as quite a trend going forward, is organizations training their customers. Now, clearly there's training organizations that do that, but that's all. They're not training their customers. They are providing training which customers buy. So I'm talking here about organizations that provide other services and products, but are now going to train their customers in how to use those services and products. And we've seen a few examples of that here at Tribal Habits, organizations coming in and providing that sort of training. And I think it's a really interesting concept. It's a really interesting way to engage with your clients and customers to help them get the most out of your products and services, to provide better support to them. It's more proactive support than just reacting when they've got a problem. We provide the training so they don't have the problem. Could be a revenue source where it's an upsell. Could also help your sales team by uncovering more client needs as they're going through the training. If you write the training well, you learn about new things they're looking for or desires, which can help with upsell or cross-sell in the sales team. And I think it's a way for training departments to play a really interesting strategic role in an organization, that they're not just there to train staff and look internally and be a cost. They're there to train everyone on the knowledge in this organization, internal or external.
Yeah.
And allows them to play a much more strategic role in the organization. And even as I talk about this, Jordan, I think we should pin this topic and come back to it in a much deeper 7x7 discussion, because I think there's really something really interesting in this and the strategic role of the training organization. Yeah,
absolutely. It sounds like a kind of a focus shift or a perspective shift.
Yeah, and so we've seen it developing in some companies, and I'm curious to see how that continues to play out.
Yeah, excellent. So let's move on and talk about tribal habits as an organization and how we've gone in 2020 and what's been the big takeaways for us.
It's been a big year. I think any organization that goes through what we went through, which is 300% growth, it's a big year. I think we're all looking forward to a little time off. First of all, yes, we're a remote working organization. So we dodged that bullet, as we discussed, and we went real smooth through 2020 from that point of view. Two things I took away. One was how flexible Tribal Habits is. So it's been really enjoyable to do some of our training reviews on modules when we're asked to review them by organizations when they create them. You know, we've had aviation industry training. We all had a good laugh because in the same week we had an eyelash extension training company and an eyebrow shaping training company, which is a bit odd to get in the same week. We had a lot of interesting things in manufacturing. So we had one company which makes a very technical product, and they provide training for installers and third parties out in the field, all through interactive online learning. We've got driver training, a company's doing it at the moment, training truck drivers on how to use special technology that's installed in trucks to make it safer, and they need to train the drivers on how to use it. I thought that was really interesting. We've seen stuff on giving better financial advice, lots of not-for-profits, some very interesting ones. One stands out in my mind in particular, which does a lot of work with Indigenous children, particularly those that are orphans or in difficulty, and they have to train up their staff on how to deal with them. That was actually really tough training to review. It's a really tough topic. Another organization that works with lost pets, particularly dogs and cats, and some of the training they had to do about, which stood out for me, on people volunteers who help look after the dogs and what happens if the dog gets violent. So that was pretty interesting training too. So really interesting to see all these different things coming up in the platform. The other thing I noticed was that when it comes to training and learning, organizations don't know what they don't know.
Yep.
And part of the fun you and I have both experienced it is when an organization realizes there's a solution for them. And, you know, they just had no idea. They thought there was nothing they could do here. And they meet Tribal Habits and find a new way of doing things and a platform that they didn't think was available to an organization like them. They thought it was just for enterprise level clients, or there weren't tools available like that. And watching them dive in and get their hands dirty, and, you know, they're like a pig in mud, just sloshing around with all the knowledge that they can now be sharing.
Yeah, I was going to say that's probably might be my big takeaway as well. Building on your point is just the speed with which people have been able to do this. We saw a lot of clients come to us, not in desperation, but in a difficult situation where training needs to be delivered and we're no longer in the office. We can't do it how we used to do it. And I've been told that I need a solution and I need it quick. And just the time taken from them to get from that position of difficulty to a point where they're delivering training, you know, whether it's library material on compliance that we've made ourselves, or it's people going off and creating their own learning. Just the turnaround time there and seeing how people reacted to that was really interesting.
It was that little sense of relief when they get that first module done and they're like, "Oh, it wasn't so bad," and they're into the next one.
Definitely. So we're running out of time here, but I want to get one last question across to you, which is, have you got any bold predictions for 2021?
I almost feel like any prediction for 2021 is bold. I feel like it's just totally uncharted, unknown. It's just so hard to know. I mean, no one would have seen where we are now 12 months ago. So that in itself is a very interesting thing. There's uncertainty out there. And, you know, here in Australia, of course, we barely feel that because we're in a very favorable environment. But I certainly feel for people in other countries where it's not as good as here. So let's talk about a couple of things. In training, bold predictions. I don't see virtual reality or augmented reality training being very important for some time yet.
I actually had that pinned as one of mine.
There you go. The learning industry bangs on about it all the time, and every year nothing happens much in it. I think the creation of it is just too complex, too expensive, and the ROI becomes very hard to justify. I mean, the time to do VR-based training versus doing something like that in Tribal Habits, using videos and narration and interactions. The time, the event, is the experience just that much better? Now, it might be for very certain things. But I see it as very niche. I actually see video. I don't think it's had its day in the sun in training at all, because the training industry is very slow with technology. I've watched a lot of YouTube over the last year, locked in the house. I actually went and got a YouTube subscription to get rid of the ads. And that's an interesting thing. I've never done that in all the years YouTube exists, but now I consume YouTube and these kind of 5 or 10 minute videos on a fairly regular basis. And they're all really interesting. And not all of them are very professional. They're just interesting. And I think training is about to learn how easy video now is to do with mobile phones if you've got the right platform. So I pity, again, all those learning management systems out there that just have no idea how to handle video or can't handle video. Or if you're still using an e-learning authoring tool where you have to upload the video into it and it just has the one version of your video and it's like 100 meg and your e-learning files like a gigabyte and it takes 5 minutes to download or upload. That's if you can't do video streaming, then you're out, you're done. Because I think video is the really big thing coming, and your ability to do that is so easy. The other thing I would just chuck in, the training industry has not had its data revolution yet. The concept of a learning record store has just gone nowhere. And I think that's about to change. I think there's an opportunity for learning to embrace big data and to start doing something with that. And I know at Tribal Habits, particularly in the second half of 2021, that's really on our agenda because we've got just so much data in the platform, is that surfacing of key data and using data to drive training more than it ever has.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a big opportunity there. Looking at learning gaps and things like that, how do we get not just pass-fail results, but where are people making mistakes? Where do we need further training? All that kind of stuff. What are people writing to our responses? So I think there's definitely a big opportunity there.
Yeah, exactly.
The other one, sorry, Dave, you go.
No, I was going to say, Matt, what was on your list?
Well, the one for me, I had augmented and virtual reality. Is this the year where it's catalyzed? So to me, I went to a few conferences earlier this year before the pandemic and was using some of that virtual reality stuff. And it's cool, but it's just not quite there yet. And until it's like really streamlined, really slick, I just don't think it is a solution yet. But if ever there's a burning platform to get that stuff up and running, I think we're seeing it now, just because people physically can't do that training. No one can show you how to fix this particular piece of equipment on an oil rig or something like that. So how do we replicate that scenario?
That's a really good point. It reminds me a little bit of 3D TV. Kind of a big thing that we now just don't use. It's a little bit like a solution in search of a problem, but maybe this has created the problem it needs to get moving.
Beyond that, I had, similarly at these conferences, there was a lot more talk, even the online conference we both went to recently, the ARI one, there was a lot of talk around health and wellness becoming a much stronger corporate KPI. I think everyone's had this like challenging working environment this year, whether you're juggling kids and the home environment and 2 people working in one house, kids are no longer at school. It's been a really challenging year for people, I think. And I think companies are beginning to see that, we all bring our unique situations and challenges to work, and how do we balance that and make sure that everyone's sort of happy and healthy while they're at work?
That's a really good point. I think that's going to be I know we're both feeling exhausted at the end of the year, and I agree there's a big mental health situation to be resolved over the next 12 months.
Yeah. And then the last one, which I think we've covered, but it's just that location is less relevant now. Like people are not, my sister works for one of the big banks. She normally goes to an office in Melbourne in the centre of the city every day. She's currently in the Margaret River region of Western Australia and has been all year. And I think she'll be there for a while longer, still doing her same job. And, you know, and that's a big enterprise who, you know, traditionally may have been a little slow to move on things like this. But yeah, to me, it's really fascinating. So I've worked remotely for the large part of my career has not been in an office. And it's always something I've been passionate about, but it's just so interesting to see it move so quickly in a year and become so commonplace. And I think people have almost got to the point now where they thought working from home would be amazing and a holiday and a vacation. And now it's pendulum swinging back and people are like, there's actually things I really like about my office. So
that's that balance part of it. I could definitely see that model where you work, you know, 2 days at work, 3 days at home, being really comfortable for a lot of people and organizations.
Yeah, that's kind of how I see all the people I speak to. That seems to be the balance. It's like go into the office for a few days, do all your meetings, do all your socializing, and then you come home for a few days and just head down and work. So cool. Well, I think we'll call it there, Dave. As I mentioned, this is our final 7 for 7 by the year. We will be back to regular programming in early January, so I encourage everyone to keep an eye out for that. If you are looking at implementing or improving your online training efforts in 2020, you can reach out to us on hello@tribalhabits.com or just jump on our website and book a demo and we can take you through it all. But thank you very much, Dave. It's been a very eventful year, a great one for Tribal Habits, but yeah, looking forward to what's in store in 2021.
Me too, Jordan. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, mate. See ya.
Thanks, everybody.